Today we're diving into a source called the Divine Blueprint. It's all about building a specific biblical theology of the unborn. Now this is a pretty complex topic, built on layers and layers of interpretation, so we're going to break down its core arguments piece by piece.
The whole framework we're about to explore really centers on this one fundamental question. What does the Bible actually say about abortion? This question is the launch pad for everything that follows.
Now, you might think you could just look up the word abortion in a concordance, right? Well, the first thing the source makes crystal clear is that the word itself, it's not in there, not once. So instead of finding a single verse, the argument is built like a detective's case by connecting principles, stories, and ancient laws to construct a much bigger picture.
Okay, so let's get into the first big idea. The source presents this powerful metaphor it calls the womb as workshop. This is the primary lens it uses to look at life before birth.
A workshop? What does that even mean? Well, think of it as divine craftsmanship. The argument is that the Bible doesn't see the womb as just a passive biological incubator. No, it's portrayed more like an artist's studio, a place where a creator is personally and actively, crafting an individual. It's a very hands-on, intentional process.
To back this up, the source points to some key scriptures. First up, this one from the prophet Jeremiah. And according to this view, the order of the words here is everything. Notice that knew you comes before formed you. This is used to argue for an identity and a purpose that exists even before physical development begins.
And that idea gets even more personal and detailed in this famous passage from Psalm 139. Listen to that language. You knit me together. That's not some detached assembly line process, right? It's intricate, it's careful. The source highlights phrases like unformed substance to argue that even in the earliest, most basic stages of development, it's seen as a person in the making, known and deliberately created.
The source then shifts from the act of creation to the experience of the one being created. It points to this really interesting story about the unborn John the Baptist, who leaped for joy in his mother's womb. Now, in this theological view, that's not just a random kick. It's presented as evidence of a rich inner life, of spiritual and emotional awareness that exists long before birth.
So, we've looked at the very personal, the individual in the womb. Now the source asks us to zoom way out, from the microscopic to the epic. This next section is called a cosmic conflict.
The core argument here is that if you read the biblical story from beginning to end, you'll see a hidden pattern, a kind of spiritual war. The source claims there's a recurring theme of an enemy who systematically tries to destroy children with a very specific goal, to stop God's plans for humanity from unfolding.
And it connects these huge, seemingly separate historical events into one single storyline. It starts with an ancient prophecy in Genesis about a seed of the woman. Then it points to Pharaoh ordering the death of all the Hebrew baby boys. And centuries later, Herod does something chillingly similar in Bethlehem. The source frames these not as isolated political acts, but as targeted strikes in a long war to eliminate that prophesied seed.
This idea goes even deeper with a concept called counterfeit sacrifice. The theological argument here is that the horrifying ancient practices of child sacrifice to gods like Molech weren't just barbaric, they were a twisted, demonic mockery. A dark mirror image of the future sacrifice the Bible says God himself planned to make of his own son.
And this is where all that ancient history crashes into the present. The source argues that when you look at the termination of life today through this cosmic conflict lens, it's seen as a modern continuation of that same ancient spiritual battle over the next generation.
Okay, so we've covered the creative and the cosmic. Now we're shifting gears and getting into the legal weeds. This section is called Life Under Law, and it examines how the unborn were viewed in biblical legislation.
The whole legal argument is built on this foundation, one of the Big Ten: you shall not murder. This is presented as the overarching, absolute moral and legal principle that protects innocent human life.
But that raises the obvious next question, right? Does that law apply equally to the unborn? To answer that, the source doesn't give a vague opinion. Instead, it zooms in on a fascinating and very specific piece of case law from the Old Testament.
Here's the case from the book of Exodus. It describes a situation where two men are fighting and a pregnant woman is accidentally injured. Now, the law says if the mother dies, the penalty is life for life. But, and this is the absolute crucial point for this argument, if the child dies as a result of the injury, the penalty is also life for life, exactly the same.
So what's the big takeaway from this law? According to the source, it's the establishment of equal legal standing. The argument is pretty straightforward.
If the penalty for causing the death is identical, then the value of the life in the eyes of the law must also be identical. The unborn child is treated with the same legal value as the adult mother.
So, after laying out this whole theological and legal framework, the question becomes, so what? What is the response? The final section of the source material tackles exactly that, framing it as a necessary balance of justice and mercy.
And it's not a simple one-step answer. The source talks about a dual mandate. Think of it like two sides of the same coin. Two crucial responsibilities that it argues must always be held together.
So here are the two parts of that mission. On one hand, you have upholding justice, which is linked to a verse from Proverbs about speaking up for the voiceless. That's the advocacy piece. But on the other hand, you have extending mercy, citing a promise of forgiveness and calling the church to be a place of healing, not just condemnation. The idea is that you can't truly have one without the other.
And this idea of mercy isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling. The source insists it has to be tangible, practical help. We're talking counseling, financial aid, adoption resources, the whole shebang. The stated goal isn't just to issue a moral command in a vacuum, but to create an environment where choosing life is a genuinely supported and viable reality.
So let's just boil this all down. What's the main conclusion of this source? It's that from this particular biblical perspective, life in the womb isn't seen as just potential life. It's framed as an actual life, a sacred, purposed, and divinely protected creation from its very earliest moments.
And the call to action that flows from that belief is threefold: to recognize what it calls a spiritual strategy at play, to actively work to protect the next generation, and to offer redemptive, tangible love and support to those facing these incredibly difficult situations.
This all leaves us with a provocative question posed by the entire framework. Is this issue primarily a social and political one, or, as this source argues, is it a focal point in a much larger, much older cosmic struggle? That's the perspective presented in the Divine Blueprint.
Thanks for watching. Visit our website www.christthelivingtruth.com to learn more.